Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world thick with smoke and clatter, where cold dust settles into the folds of your collar, and the air tastes like burnt metal and boiled cabbage. You're standing in the chilly pre-dawn of the Industrial Revolution, somewhere in northern England. The sun hasn't risen, but chimneys already exhale their black breath. You can hear the hiss of steam, the clang of iron tools, the scuff of leather shoes against cobblestone. And among it all, you notice the smallest figures moving with purpose. Not just boys in flat caps, but girls with skirts hitched and hair tied in makeshift rags. Women, too, elbow-deep in engine grease, vanishing into the warehouse doors before the town's even properly awake. You're about to spend your life, yes, your whole life, in a world powered not just by steam, but by the under-acknowledged grit of women. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. But you'll try. You'll wake early, work late, eat little, and spend years spinning thread, lifting coal, or scrubbing parts with hands that never quite get clean again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in a factory town, not the iconic, soot-glazed London of Sherlock Holmes and foggy intrigue, but a smaller place, perhaps Manchester, Leeds, or Glasgow, where the real work of the Industrial Revolution grinds on its street level. These towns have grown fast and unruly, the population booming like the factory whistles. Brick tenements rise beside canals, and everything smells faintly of mildew and ash. You live here now. You're not a noble. You're not a man in a top hat with shares in the East India Company. You're just here, a girl, a woman, and you've got work to do. Factories are buzzing hives long before sunrise. You arrive with a shawl over your head, trying to shield your lungs from the bite of morning smog. Inside, the cotton mill is warm and loud, humming like 100 kettles boiling at once. The air tastes dusty, oily, like someone melted an old sofa and forgot to open a window. You clock in, not with a card, but by nodding to the floor foreman, whose eyebrows never move and whose coat smells like wet sawdust. Your job? Maybe you're a piecer, mending broken threads on spinning machines. Maybe you're sweeping cotton lint off the floor to prevent it from igniting. Yes, it's that flammable. Or you're feeding bobbins into a frame that thuds like a heartbeat. The machines are fast, unforgiving. You don't wear gloves, those catch in gears and pull fingers with them. So you learn to work barehanded, even when your skin splits open from the cold. No one counts your cuts. The men in the upper offices, the ones in waistcoats and clean collars, like to say that machines are the future, that women and children are simply part of progress. The truth is simpler. You're smaller. You're cheaper. And when accidents happen, they say you should have been more careful. Still, there's camaraderie in the factory. You know the rhythm of the looms like a lullaby. The other girls share bread crusts and boiled sweets between shifts. Sometimes, if you're lucky, someone brings in a smuggled newspaper with a cartoon about Queen Victoria's hats. You laugh quietly, swallowing joy like stolen honey. Historians still argue whether industrial labor offered women freedom or bondage. On one hand, you earn wages, money in your pocket, at least in theory. On the other, your labor is clocked, measured, and watched. If you take too long on break, someone notices. If you miss a day, someone replaces you. Here's the thing they don't tell you in school books. Women were never just helping. They were driving entire sectors. In cotton, women often outnumbered men on the floor. In textiles, they made up more than 60% of the workforce by mid-century. They weren't just doing their bit. They were the bit. Fringe fact, some factory owners thought it was morally uplifting to employ women. They'd host Sunday lectures in mill halls, urging godliness while underpaying you sixpence for 12 hours of lint-choked work. You'd sit on a splintered bench while a man in a frock coat told you to be grateful. At night, you walk home under gaslights that flicker like tired eyes. You pass boys hauling coal and girls bent beneath baskets of thread. The street vendors call out soft, weary songs, hot pies, warm bread, but you can't afford any tonight. You think about saving for a shawl without holes. You think about tomorrow. The factory has a kind of gravity, pulling you back day after day. You dream about it sometimes. The hiss of steam, the clack of spools, the strange quiet when a belt snaps and everyone freezes, waiting to see if someone lost a limb. It's odd how that danger becomes normal, part of the rhythm. You know a girl named Maggie who lost 2 fingers to a carting engine. She jokes about it now, calls them her souvenir nubs. She still works, of course. Quitting isn't really an option. Not when your family needs the money. Not when rent is due and the landlord doesn't accept tears. There's a paradox here. You're invisible, yet essential. History books skip your name, but the machines don't run without you. The men who give speeches at Parliament don't mention your lungs turning gray, but they profit from your labor. And still, every morning, you lace up your boots and go. Because if you don't, someone else will. The factory doesn't wait. The machines don't care how old you are. They don't slow down just because your hands are small, or your arms get tired, or your feet don't quite reach the floor. In fact, they seem to work better when you're tiny. When you can crawl under them without getting stuck. When you don't ask questions. When you don't know yet that you should. You wake up before the sun again. You always do. A cold rag on your face, a bite of stale bread, and then the long walk to the mill. If you're lucky, your boots still have soles. If not, well, no one's looking at your feet. They're too busy avoiding the icy puddles and piles of horse dung left behind from the morning carts. Today you're piecing threads again. It sounds delicate, almost romantic, like embroidery in a quiet parlor. It's not. You sit on a narrow bench, elbows up, eyes squinting in the low light. One thread breaks. You tie it fast, 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 before the whole spool unwinds or the loom stops altogether. The manager doesn't like stoppages. Stoppages mean explanations, and explanations mean less pay. You're good at this. Quick fingers, quiet mouth. You've been told you have nimble hands, which, oddly, feels more like a warning than a compliment. See, in these early years of the Industrial Revolution, factory owners realized something strange. Children, and especially girls, were ideal for certain jobs. You're small enough to crawl inside tight machine frames. Your fingers can twist broken threads with almost surgical precision. You don't complain much. You don't unionize yet. And you cost far less than a grown man. That's how it starts. You're hired not because of what you know, but because of what you aren't. Tall, expensive, inconvenient. Mainstream fact. By the 1830s, nearly half of the textile workforce in Britain was under 18. Many of them were under 12. Some were as young as 6. Yes, 6. You can barely reach the doorknob at that age, but somehow you're expected to manage the flywheel of a spinning frame. There's an old superstition among workers that says machines take children. They eat them like offerings. No one really talks about it, but everyone knows someone who lost a cousin or sister to the jaws of the factory. A snapped belt, a loose sleeve, a fall down the grain chute. The machines don't stop. They just chew and spin. You think about this as you watch little Lottie, just 8, dragging a sack of bobbins across the floor, her face streaked with dust, her eyes glassy from exhaustion. You wonder if anyone outside these walls even knows she exists. Historians still argue whether this kind of labor was a grim necessity or an inexcusable exploitation. The reality feels more tangled. Your family needs your wages, however meager. There's no school waiting for you. No magical fairy godmother offering scholarships. Just the loom, the clatter, the rhythm, and the chance to put something on the table that isn't just boiled turnips. You meet girls from everywhere: Welsh, Scottish, Irish, Yorkshire-born. Some are orphans placed by charity schools. Others are apprenticed, which is a polite way of saying loaned out like livestock. A few were born in the same tenements as you. You all speak in half-whispers, trading stories about which machines to avoid, which foremen to fear, which corners are safe to cry in if you need to. Odd tidbit. One particularly strange factory in Derby had workers sleep inside the mill. Not next to it, inside it. They'd roll up in cots between shifts, like factory hamsters, napping to the creak of floorboards and the hiss of the steam pipe. The logic? It saved time, which, in the factory world, is money. Sometimes, just to stay awake, you imagine other lives. Maybe you're a governess in a grand house, reading books and wearing gloves that aren't brown from coal smoke. Maybe you're a shop girl, or a seamstress in a quiet tailor's attic with warm lamplight and tea. These are fantasies, of course. Not because they're impossible, but because you don't even know anyone who's done that. Your mother worked in a mill. Your sister does now. So will your niece, if she's unlucky enough to live past 10. The foreman barks something across the floor. Someone's dropped a shuttle again. The machine snarls. For a second, everyone holds their breath. Nothing breaks. This time, you notice a curious detail. One of the older girls wears her hair tucked into a flour sack she's cut into a bonnet. She says it keeps the oil out. Another girl wears gloves with the fingers cut off, stitched with thick black thread like something out of a horror story. You wonder if those fingers were lost before or after the gloves were made. By now, you know the tricks. How to breathe through your mouth so you don't cough up lint. How to squint just enough to dodge eye strain, but still catch a snapped thread. How to tie a knot one-handed while using your other to brace the spinning frame. None of these skills are in books. They're passed down in looks, whispers, practice. You've got a PhD in survival, earned with blood and broken nails. The day ends, not with a bell, but with a sigh. The shift's over. You step outside and realize it's still light. That's something, at least. The sky is a dim yellow-gray, like bruised cream. You walk home with aching feet and the strange metallic tang of iron on your tongue. You can't explain it. It's just there. And here's the strangest part. This will be your life for years, and no one will ever write your name down. Not in history books. Not in poems. Not even on your own gravestone, which might just say daughter or wife. But the factory will remember you. Every thread you spun, every knot you tied, every hour you stole from sleep to keep the gears turning. It remembers, even if no one else does. You learn to tell time not by clocks, but by noise. The looms thrum louder after breakfast, slower by dusk. You count the hours by the aches in your shoulders, the blisters on your fingers, the color of light that filters through the factory's cracked windows. Today is Tuesday, which means half day in the spinning rooms, but only for some. Not for you. You work in Lancashire now. You didn't ask to come here, but the job brought you. Or maybe your family did. Either way, you're one of tens of thousands. Lancashire is cotton country, and its red brick mills stretch for miles like low, grim castles with smoke for flags. The rhythm of your days is governed by machines that never sleep. And neither do you, not properly. You are a spinner now, or a weaver, or a carter. Maybe you move spools across the room, back and forth in a mechanical dance. You're part of a lineage of women whose hands quite literally clothe the empire. The cloth you help produce, calico, muslin, broadcloth, goes out into the world. To London, to Africa, to India. But you stay right here. Mainstream fact. By the mid-19th century, women made up more than half the textile workforce in industrial Britain, especially in Lancashire's mills. They weren't assistants or helpers. They were the industry. You work alongside women of all ages. Some are barely old enough to button their own coats. Others could be your grandmother. You know their names, their coughs, their tempers. You know which ones sneak a nip of gin at lunch, and which ones hum old folk tunes between loom shifts. And when someone doesn't show up for work one day, you know better than to ask. The sound inside the mill is constant, deafening even. At first, your ears ring after every shift. Eventually, they just stop bothering. You learn to lip read out of habit. Conversations are shouted in fragments. Jokes are reduced to nods and raised eyebrows. Secrets are passed hand to hand like notes folded in heat-wilted paper. Fringe detail. Some mills actually hired sign language instructors, not for compassion, but because so many workers went deaf from the noise that they needed a way to communicate on the floor. You're not sure if that's progress or just paperwork. Your muscles adapt too. After months on the loom, your shoulders slope forward like you're always bracing for a wave. Your hands harden. Your back hums at night. Sometimes you wake up with your fingers still twitching in the rhythm of thread tying. It's not sleep, it's rehearsal. The factory manager sometimes refers to you as his girls. Not affectionately, more like inventory. You are a row on a ledger, a known output level, a replaceable part in a bigger machine. If you fall ill, they send someone to your boarding house to fetch a cousin. If you die, your job is filled before your body's cold. There's pride, though. Strange pride. You're good at your work. You help others. You can spot a frayed belt from 20 feet, can thread a bobbin with your eyes half closed. You're part of something massive. You've learned to carry dignity like a tin lunch pail, battered, but yours. Historians still argue whether factory work liberated women by giving them wages or simply shifted their oppression from home to floor. In your body, the answer is obvious. It's both. You have a coin in your pocket, yes, but it's often spent before you even get home. Rent, bread, needles, soap. There's never quite enough. One afternoon, someone brings in a visitor, a government inspector or a philanthropist with well-polished shoes. He walks the aisle slowly, eyes squinting as if trying to see the poetry in this place. You don't say anything. You don't have time. You're behind on your thread count and your machine is growling. But you notice him nodding solemnly, as if he's discovered something tragic. You want to laugh, or cry, or throw a bobbin at his shiny top hat. Sometimes, after work, you sit by the canal with the other girls. Your feet dangle over the edge. You watch the water ripple in thick, oily whirls. You don't talk much, you're too tired, but someone always sings. Not a real song, just a slow hum, half melody, half sigh. It's the sound of things still moving. There's talk lately of a factory reform act. Something about limiting hours, or stopping children from working under 9. You all nod like you've heard it before. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it's just more paper and ink. Either way, the machines will still run tomorrow. You'll still be here. Your sister works the night shift at a different mill. You pass her sometimes on the street. She looks like a ghost of you, lit by gaslight and fatigue. She's 16, but walks like she's 50. Still, she smiles. You both do. It's the only defiance you have left. Here's a detail few remember. Many of these women formed tight-knit crews. Teams that operated in rhythm, supported each other, even developed in jokes and superstitions. Some wore lucky aprons. Others kept bits of ribbon tucked in their bodices, tiny charms against injury or dismissal. You have a string bracelet you never take off. You can't remember where you got it, but it stays. And here's the irony. All this invisible labor, this breathtaking scale of female effort, was once celebrated. Briefly, a few 19th century magazines even published portraits of mill maidens, idealized in ruffled caps, smiling beside their spotless looms. Of course, the real women never looked like that. But for a moment, the world almost saw them. Almost. Now, no one remembers their names. Their signatures are gone. Their faces faded from the photo plates. But the fabric remains. Somewhere out there, a child is swaddled in a blanket spun by your hands. A uniform is stitched from your labor. A flag flutters with dye you once poured. The machines hum on. You don't stop. Not yet. Your room is 4 walls, a cot, and a draft. The wallpaper peels at the edges, and the floor creaks like it's trying to whisper secrets it heard last century. You share the space with 2 other girls, Eliza and Joan, who both snore like they're clearing coal from a tunnel. You're all more bone than girl, more cough than laugh. When people say working women, in this era, they rarely mention what that really means once you leave the factory gates. The labor doesn't end. It only changes shape. You're exhausted, yes, but you still have to wash your clothes, darn your socks, maybe scrape together a meal if you're lucky. Home isn't a refuge. It's just the next shift. Your boarding house isn't run by a kindly landlady named Mrs. Applebottom. It's a business. The rooms are rented by the bed, not by the space. If you want privacy, try the outhouse. Even there, you're likely to be interrupted by a neighbor's kid chasing rats. Breakfast? Usually a crust of yesterday's bread and weak tea so pale you can see the bottom of the cup. If someone's doing well, you might get porridge. No sugar, just oats and boiling water. And if you sleep past 5 a.m., too bad. The other girls are already clomping around with their boots, making the floorboards thump like a marching band of misery. Mainstream fact. Tens of thousands of working-class women in Britain during the Industrial Revolution lived in communal boarding houses, often sleeping 3 or more to a room, sometimes in shifts, sharing cots like time slots at a laundromat. Sometimes the owner of the boarding house tries to enforce rules. No men after dark. No swearing. No excessive coughing. You laugh, as if the soot-drenched air of the town wasn't already pickling your lungs. Eliza once coughed blood on her pillow, and the landlady fined her for staining the linens. You don't get sick leave. If you're too ill to stand, you stay home and don't get paid. If you're home too often, the foreman replaces you. That's the math. You learn to keep moving, even when your ribs ache or your nose bleeds black. You convince yourself it's just dust. It always is, until it isn't. There's a girl named Sarah in the room down the hall. She's 15, has fingers like matchsticks and hair that never seems to dry. She barely talks. One night you catch her sewing tiny flowers onto her work apron. You ask her why. She shrugs. Makes me feel like someone, she says. The next week, she's gone. No one knows where. You think about those flowers for days. Fringe fact: some reformers toured working women's housing and noted the dismal, yet surprisingly organized spaces. Small altars made of matchboxes, pinned up scraps of bright fabric, even hand-drawn pictures on the walls. Tiny declarations of identity in a world that forgot to ask your name. If you're married, things get different. Not better, necessarily. Just different. You don't live in a boarding house anymore. You probably share a cellar flat with your husband and any children who survive past infancy. You still work. Sometimes at home. Sometimes in the mill. Either way, the house is your second employer. And unlike the first, it never closes. You scrub laundry in a cold basin with lye that eats at your skin. You stir watery stew and pick insects from the flour. You mend shirts until your eyes twitch. You rock crying babies on your knee while nursing another, your shoulders hunched like parentheses. The noise never stops. Historians still argue whether women in domestic spaces during the Industrial Revolution were better off than those in factories. As if endless unpaid labor, medical neglect, and social invisibility are some kind of upgrade. Some women try to balance both worlds. Factory shift by day, housework by night. Their bodies break faster, but they keep going. You've seen one mother come straight from the loom room to breastfeed her baby in the alley behind the mill, then head back inside. The baby sleeps on a folded shawl beneath her workbench. This is normal. It's called making it work. On Sundays, you walk. Not for fun, just to feel air that doesn't vibrate with gears. You see other girls out too, dressed in their best, which usually means not dirty. Some stroll past churches, peeking through the doors as hymns drift out like lost promises. Others visit their families, if they still have any nearby. Most just walk. Not toward anything. Just away. Evenings are short. The light fades early, and the coal stove burns low. You and Eliza and Joan talk in half-whispers before bed, huddled under shared blankets that smell like damp wool and factory grease. You joke about running off to London, or Paris, or anywhere with pastries. But you all know you'll be here tomorrow. And the next day, odd detail. Some boarding houses had rotating chores, a chalkboard list of who cleans the shared pots, who sweeps the steps, who empties the chamber pot. If you forget your day, the others let you know, usually by leaving the pot outside your door. Full. Still, there are small joys. Someone brings a sweet from the corner shop and breaks it into 3 uneven pieces. You hear a new song hummed through the wall. You borrow a shawl for your cousin's wedding and feel, briefly, like a person instead of a gear. You learn not to look at mirrors too long. They lie. Or maybe they just tell a truth you'd rather not see. The smudges under your eyes. The new creases. The soot settling into your hairline like roots. Better to look away and keep moving. Your dreams, when you get them, are strange. You dream of endless hallways lined with looms. Of babies crying through walls. Of walking into fog that smells like oil and lilacs. You never reach the end. But you wake up. You always wake up. Because you have to. The mill isn't a place where you leave your life at the door. If you're a mother, your children come with you. Or they wait in the shadows while you work, curled beneath workbenches like ghosts between shifts. It's not uncommon. In fact, it's normal. You work. You mother. You survive. All at once, and usually in the same apron. You rock a cradle with your foot while tying thread. You lift a shuttle with one hand and a toddler with the other. The noise never stops, and neither do you. Today, there's a baby sleeping beside the spinning frame. Yours? Maybe. Or maybe your sister's. Or your neighbor's. In the mill, children become communal property. Everyone feeds them, rocks them, watches them in turn. It's a makeshift creche made of thread baskets and torn shawls, wedged into warm corners near the engine pipes. Mainstream fact. Many women in Industrial Revolution mills brought their infants to work with them, often placing them in corners or under benches while they labored. Some mills even unofficially tolerated this, as long as the children didn't interfere with productivity. You've trained yourself to recognize your baby's cry amid the factory's roar. You hear it like a note out of tune. One quick glance, a signal from another girl, and you're moving before anyone else notices. You soothe, adjust, tuck them back in, and return to the loom before the foreman lifts his head. It's a dance. Clumsy, exhausting, beautiful in a way only you can see. Historians still argue whether mill life was worse for mothers than staying home in poverty. The truth is, there wasn't really a choice. You needed wages. Babies didn't come with pause buttons. So you bundled them in wool, hoped the lint didn't choke them, and kept your hands moving. Some mothers have older daughters watch the little ones. But that just creates two tired people instead of one. You remember being the watcher, the dull ache in your arms, the frustration of trying to quiet a hungry infant while other kids your age were, well, not exactly playing, but at least not wiping drool off borrowed skirts. And yet, the bond stays. Stronger, somehow, because of the noise, because of the work. You know your baby's scent under the grease, their weight against your hip, their breathing when they fall asleep in the rhythm of machinery. You carry them everywhere, even if only in your mind. Fringe detail. In one Lancashire mill, women placed their babies in custom-woven baskets strung from ceiling beams like hammocks, swaying above the work floor. The baskets rocked with the movement of the looms, giving infants a strange, mechanical lullaby. Dangerous? Probably. But ingenious? Absolutely. You don't get time off. If your child is sick, you wrap them up tighter and bring them anyway. If they cough, you tell yourself it's nothing. Everyone coughs. You coughed when you were a baby, and look at you. You're still here. Sort of. Nursing happens in corners. Not modestly, but efficiently. A quick lift of the blouse. A brief, intimate pause in the middle of a 10-hour shift. The baby suckles. You count thread. The foreman pretends not to notice, as long as the machine doesn't stop. Some factories try to ban children from the floor entirely, but then production drops. And suddenly, no one enforces the rule. It's a balancing act between compassion and quotas, and guess which one usually wins? One day, a girl named May drops her baby. Not far, just a tumble from a shawl to the floor. But the sound is sharp. Everyone hears it. The baby screams, more startled than hurt. May scoops him up with trembling hands, her face pale. The foreman approaches, slow, cautious, like he's hoping someone else will deal with it. In the end, he says nothing, just nods at her to continue. And she does. That's what's expected. There are no changing tables, no soft lullabies, no bedtime stories. Your baby learns to nap to the rhythm of machines, to eat fast, to be quiet. You worry about their lungs, about the black streaks on their blankets, about the day they're old enough to work beside you and the cycle starts again. Some women talk about getting out, saving enough to buy a stall at market, marrying a man with steady wages, moving to the country. You smile when they talk, but it's a soft smile, the kind you give to dreams you've folded away for later. Oddly enough, there's solidarity here. Motherhood becomes a shared task, like cleaning or hauling water. Women swap lullabies from Wales, Scotland, Ireland. They pass around mashed carrots in tins. They stitch little toys from thread scraps and empty bobbins. A doll made of wool ends and lint might not look like much, but in the eyes of your child, it's everything. Historians rarely write about this. About the care networks women made in the corners of mills. About the secret milk exchanges, the borrowed shawls, the whispered comfort. But it happened. You lived it. You helped someone else's baby sleep while she finished her quota. Someone did the same for you. The machines keep grinding. The lights flicker. You think about your child's future, what school might be like, what jobs might still exist. But those thoughts are dangerous. They make the work seem even heavier. So you fold them up like you do the baby's blanket. One corner at a time. You hum an old song as you tie off a thread. Your baby stirs, doesn't wake. The girl beside you grins. She's rocking a cradle with her boot. You realize you're both moving in the same rhythm, perfectly synchronized, like clock hands ticking towards something quiet. And somehow, in this place of steam and sweat and soot, you've made a kind of nursery. A cradle not of wood, but of will. You can barely hear yourself think over the din of the looms, but under the racket, something else has started to stir, something slower, softer, and far more dangerous than a runaway shuttle. You hear it in murmurs at break time, in glances exchanged over needlework, in the way Mary rolls her eyes when the foreman docks her pay for being 2 minutes late. The women are talking, and not just about bread prices or the new girl's crooked hem. They're talking about change. It starts like smoke, thin, hard to see. A rumor of a meeting, a leaflet someone left behind, a woman who spoke up and didn't get fired. Yet, you don't quite believe it at first. The idea that you, elbow deep in oil and steam, could refuse something, could say no. But the discontent has been building, quietly, like the slow turn of a boiler. Too many pay cuts, too many injuries, too many children coughing blood in the corner. And finally, one day, someone stands up and says it out loud. Mainstream fact. Throughout the 19th century, working women were involved in early labor organizing across Britain, particularly in textile hubs like Manchester and Glasgow. Though often erased from records, their contributions helped shape some of the earliest union principles. It's not exactly a strike, not yet. More like a refusal, a small collective breath hold. The spinners on one side of the floor slow their machines, then stop. The weavers glance around, hesitate, then follow. Soon the hum of the factory sputters into silence. It's terrifying, like the air has changed temperature. You don't know whether to run or cheer. The manager appears, red-faced, puffing like a kettle left too long on the stove. He yells. Of course he does. Threatens to dock pay, to call the constable. But the women don't move. You're one of them. Your hands tremble slightly, but your spine is straight. This moment, however small, is yours. Historians still argue whether these early protests were organized resistance or just mass frustration boiled over. But you know better. There's too much timing, too much whispering, too much risk for it to be accidental. It isn't long before retaliation comes. Not mass arrests, yet, but targeted cuts. Sarah loses her job. Eliza is reassigned to the coldest corner of the dye room. A few girls are told their services are no longer needed. But others stay, and they keep talking. You meet in borrowed spaces. A chapel basement, a friend's front room. Sometimes even by candlelight after shift, huddled around a dented tea kettle. You read aloud from radical pamphlets passed down from the Chartists. You share stories from other mills, about women in Leeds who locked out their overseer, or Scottish workers who wrote petitions to Parliament on scraps of linen. Fringe fact. In the 1830s, women hand-stitched protest slogans onto apron hems and bodices, quiet acts of defiance that could be concealed during inspections and revealed during marches. These weren't just clothes, they were manifestos. Some women are afraid. Of course they are. Losing your job doesn't just mean hardship. It can mean eviction, starvation. But fear is funny. It doesn't always stop you. Sometimes it sharpens your voice, makes you bold in ways you never imagined. One woman stands out. Her name might be Ellen, or Hannah, or possibly Ruth, depending on who's telling the story. She's not much taller than you, speaks with a thick accent and a voice like gravel. But when she talks, people listen. She's the first to use the word rights. The first to say wages like it's something sacred. The first to remind you that you're not just surviving, you're building something. The foremen start watching you more closely. You pretend not to notice. You joke louder, work faster, act smaller. But inside, you're burning. Because for the first time, you can imagine another world. Not one without work, but one where work isn't punishment. Where motherhood isn't a liability. Where your hands don't bleed for someone else's profit. One day, someone brings in a petition. Over 100 signatures, many of them just marks. Excess made by women who've never been taught to write, but who know exactly what they're agreeing to. The paper smells like soap and ink and resolve. You sign it. The petition goes nowhere, of course. Not at first. Parliament doesn't care. The factory owners don't care. But the women do. And that's enough for now. You begin to hear about other movements. The match girls in London. The pit brow lasses in Wigan. The washerwomen in Birmingham who stopped working until their wages rose. It's like discovering you're not alone in a forest you thought was empty. You start telling your own story. Not out loud, maybe, but in gestures. In the way you teach the new girl to bandage her hand. In the way you share half your bread with the sick woman down the lane. In the way you hum songs with words no longer quite so hopeless. Odd tidbit. Some factory women composed and sang protest ballads during breaks. hiding their meaning in metaphors so absurd they slipped past the foreman, songs about looms that bite and thimbles that lie. Satire wrapped in thread. You don't call yourself a revolutionary. That word's for pamphlets and poets. You're just tired. Tired and smart, and increasingly unwilling to accept that this is all there is. The factory won't collapse. Not yet. The wheels still turn. The quotas still loom. But there's something in the air now, besides soot. Attention. A potential. You feel it when the machines pause for just a second too long. When someone dares to ask, why not more? The men still run the ledgers. Still sign the pay slips. Still wear the suits. But they're not the only ones paying attention anymore. You are not a hero. You are not famous. But you are here. And you are awake. You smell the match factory before you see it. Sulfur and sweat, heavy in the air, like something's been burning too long and no one remembered to open a window. The building itself is nothing special. Brick, soot-streaked windows, a doorway so narrow you have to turn sideways to squeeze through. But inside is where the real fire lives. You're one of the match girls now. Not glamorous. Not romantic. Just necessary. You sit at long tables, shoulders pressed to other girls, fingers moving fast over trays of white phosphorus paste. It smells sharp, like vinegar and lightning. You try not to breathe too deep. You dip the match heads, one by one. Hundreds a day. Thousands. The paste clings to your skin, stains your nails yellow. You wipe your face with your sleeve and forget that your sleeve is soaked in it too. The foreman tells you not to worry. It's perfectly safe. And then he steps outside for a breath of fresh air. Mainstream fact. The Bryant and May Match Factory in London employed thousands of girls and women during the 19th century. They worked long hours handling white phosphorus, which caused severe health problems, including a condition called phossy jaw, where the bones in the jaw literally began to rot. You don't know what it's called yet. You just know your teeth ache. Your breath smells strange. Sometimes, the side of your face feels like it's buzzing. You see other girls with swollen jaws, loose teeth, bandages tied around their heads like makeshift muzzles. No one wants to talk about it. You all know what it means. They used to call it the glow. The way the phosphorus clung to you, even in the dark, lighting up your fingers like candles. You'd laugh about it at first. Pretend you were magic. Pretend it was beautiful. But the laughter stopped when Mary's cheek collapsed. When they buried her without a jaw. Historians still argue whether the factory owners truly understood the dangers of phosphorus or simply chose to ignore them. The girls knew. They always knew. They just didn't have the power to walk away. You're not even the lowest paid worker here. That honor goes to the youngest girls, the flickerers, who dip the match tips for hours at a stretch. They're often 10 or 11, sent in by families desperate for any coin. The factory likes small fingers. They're quick, replaceable. One of them, Bessie, sits next to you most days. She's got a gap in her front teeth and a laugh that cuts through the haze. Today, she's quieter. She says her mouth hurts. You know that look. You've seen it before. You offer her part of your lunch, bread, a hard slice of cheese, but she just shakes her head. Fringe detail. Girls suffering from early stages of phosphorus poisoning often describe the pain as fire in the bones. It started in the jaw but eventually spread through the face and neck. There was no real treatment. Most just disappeared from the factory floor and were never seen again. And yet, it's the girls who light the spark of change. It starts, once again, with whispers. About the fines, how the foreman docks pay for sneezing too loud, for being late by a single minute. About the absences, how no one ever explains where the sick girls go. About the pay, how you earn barely enough to cover rent and a cup of tea. One day someone speaks. Her name is Annie Besant, a journalist, a reformer. She listens to your stories and writes them down. The factory tries to shut her up. She refuses. And suddenly, your suffering isn't a rumor anymore. It's news. Mainstream history does remember this part. In 1888, the match girls of Bryant and May walked out. An organized strike of hundreds of young women demanding better pay, safer conditions, and an end to the endless deductions and punishments. It was one of the first major strikes led almost entirely by women and girls. You're scared. Of course you are. The factory is your life, your income, your community. But when the call comes to strike, you join. You stand outside the gates, shoulders pressed together, holding signs you scrawled on laundry boards and old sheets. You chant, you shout, and for the first time, people hear you. Newspapers pick up the story. Politicians wrinkle their brows. People who've never thought about where matches come from suddenly realize they've been lit with other people's pain. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of the match girl strike. Some say it was symbolic. Others say it helped trigger reforms in labor law and public health. You know it did something even bigger. It proved that a girl with phosphorus-stained fingers and holes in her shoes could change history. The strike doesn't last forever. Eventually, the factory makes concessions. Small ones, but real. A slight wage increase. Slightly better hours. Promises to reduce deductions. It's not perfect, but it's a crack in the wall. And cracks grow. Odd tidbit. After the strike, some match girls were invited to dine with middle-class reformers and philanthropists. They sat at white-clothed tables, blinking in the light, and used forks. One girl, when asked how it felt to be a guest, simply said, "Like I'm not disposable today." You go back to work. The sulfur is still there. The glow, too. But the silence is gone. Now, when someone is sick, you check on them. When someone's pay is docked unfairly, you protest. When someone asks why you don't just be grateful for the work, you smile and say, "Because now I know I deserve more." Your jaw aches sometimes. You worry it might start. The burning. The rot. But you brush your teeth with salt and whisper to yourself, "Not yet. Not today." You light a match that evening. It flares to life in your hand, sulfur curling like a spirit. You watch it burn down to the wood, and for a moment, you wonder how many hands like yours have held that same flame. The world forgets, eventually, but you won't. You remember every girl who glowed before the fire went out. The train rattles past like thunder, iron wheels grinding, whistles screaming, sparks flying into the gray northern sky. You flinch, but not because it's unfamiliar. You live by the tracks now. You dream in whistles. You count your steps by the clang of steel. You've left the mill behind for now. The wages dropped too low, or the machines got faster than your fingers. Or maybe you were simply tired of thread. So you came here, to the rails and the coal yards, to try your luck with steam and soot. It's louder, harder, riskier. But the pay, if you're lucky, is a few pennies more. Of course, you're not supposed to be here. Women in the rail yards are whispered about, side-eyed, talked around. You're called improper, coarse, strange. But then, strangely, when the coal has to be sorted or the bolts have to be turned, no one seems to mind your presence too much. Mainstream fact, though largely unrecognized, women worked in railway construction, engine cleaning, and coal handling during the Industrial Revolution, especially during times of labor shortage or in smaller towns where no one could afford to be choosy. You start out cleaning engines, your skirt hitched up with a rope belt, sleeves rolled, face smudged by dinner time. You climb inside the firebox with a brush and a bucket of brick dust. The soot coats your throat like velvet turned inside out. It never comes off fully. Even on Sundays, you smell faintly of cinders. There are other women here too, though not many. You get to know them fast. Ruth, who can carry a bucket of bolts one-handed. Meg, who once chased off a drunk with a spanner and hasn't stopped bragging about it since. Lizzie, who keeps a small mirror in her apron and checks her hair before every shift. Even steam needs style, she jokes. Historians still argue whether women in heavy industries like rail and mining were anomalies or simply underrecorded. The truth, as usual, lies in the gaps. You're not a myth. You're not an exception. You're just invisible on paper. And then there's the scandal. You hear it whispered behind walls, muttered at pubs. She's sleeping with the supervisor. She's dressed like a man. She's not ladylike. The idea of a woman doing a man's job sets tongues wagging faster than news of a royal wedding. Never mind that you're doing twice the labor for half the pay. Never mind that you're feeding a family of 6. You're out of place, and that makes people nervous. Sometimes you laugh it off. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find a quiet corner behind the tool shed and cry until the whistle calls you back. Fringe detail. One woman working in a Yorkshire rail yard disguised herself as a man for nearly 6 years. When discovered, she said she only did it because men didn't get their wages questioned so much. And she was right. There's camaraderie, too. You eat lunch beside the boiler house. trading bites of pickled onions and hard cheese. Someone's always got a harmonica. Someone else knows all the verses to a mining song too rude for polite company. You pretend not to know the words. But you do. You all do. The coal porters, men, mostly, are wary of you at first. Some are cruel. Some are protective. One teaches you how to hook a wagon without losing your fingers. Another tells you not to stand too close when the engine whistles. It can burst your eardrums if you're not braced. These tips save your life more than once. Your job shifts over time. From cleaning to hauling, then to coupling cars, then, briefly, to weighing loads. The foreman says he likes your precision. He says it like it's a compliment, but you know it's code for you don't complain. You take it. It's still more than you got in the mills. And yet, the danger here is different. There are no sharp bobbins or spinning belts, but there are runaway wagons, broken axles, steam bursts. You see a man lose 3 toes in a shunting accident. You see another one fall between cars and not come out. You learn to listen, not just to sounds, but to silence. When the rail yard goes quiet, something's gone wrong. Still, there's power in the rails. Literal power. You feel it in your bones when the train rolls by. The ground trembles. The air warps. You stand tall even when covered in grime, because you helped make that movement happen. You cleared the grit, sorted the iron, kept the gears turning. Odd tidbit. Some rail companies insisted on issuing women bloomers instead of skirts, strictly for safety. This led to brief fashion scandals, with newspapers calling them railway Amazons. The women themselves? They just rolled their eyes and went back to work. You don't get medals. You don't get your name carved into plaques. But you leave traces, graffiti scratched into tool handles, initials burned into wood with matches, a small tin heart hidden under the engine housing. Proof that you were here, that you mattered. The papers still talk about progress, about how steam is changing everything, about the brilliance of Brunel and Stevenson and the empire's expanding rail network. They don't mention the women with cracked knuckles who scrubbed the engines before they launched, or the girls who pushed carts through the dark, or the ones who got too close to the boilers and never came back. That's okay. You remember. You all do. You keep showing up. Keep holding your place in a world that keeps trying to shuffle you offstage. You stand your ground in the yard, boots planted in gravel, lungs full of smoke and stubbornness. And when the whistle blows, you raise your hand, lift your spanner, and go back to work. Because scandal or not, you're part of this story, whether they write you in or not. You rise before the sun, not because there's a shift to punch in for, but because breakfast won't cook itself. There's no whistle calling you to work. Just the cry of a baby, the clatter of a leaking kettle, and the knowledge that if you don't scrub that floor today, no one else will. You're not a factory girl anymore. Not officially. Now, they say you keep house, which is odd, because it feels less like you're keeping it and more like you're wrestling it into shape every day just so it won't collapse around your ears. The domestic world has changed. The factory came for the home, too. The spinning jenny was just the start. The iron stove, the mechanical mangle, the sewing machine, the coal-fired boiler, they all promised to make housework easier. Quicker. Lighter. They lied. Mainstream fact. As industrial technology made its way into middle and working-class homes, domestic labor was redefined, not reduced. New appliances often created higher expectations for cleanliness, food preparation, and clothing standards, increasing the daily workload for housewives. Now you wash twice as many clothes, because it's possible now. You sew more elaborate hems, because the machine does it faster. You iron sheets. Sheets. Because someone decided wrinkled linens were a sign of laziness. The stove takes coal. You shovel it in, knees creaking, skirt tucked high. The laundry boiler spits steam in your face. The water smells of soap and metal. You stir it with a stick that used to be part of a broom. By noon, your arms ache like you've been hauling bricks. And yet, when your husband comes home, he'll ask what you did all day. You'll want to throw the iron at his head. You won't, but you'll want to. Historians still argue whether domestic work in the 19th century was a continuation of traditional female roles or a new industrial model disguised in lace and tea towels. Either way, it feels like factory work without the factory. You're expected to be a magician, making meals from stale bread and root vegetables, turning patches into trousers, turning tantrums into bedtime stories. All while keeping the front room tidy enough in case the vicar stops by. You envy your single friends. Not because they have more money, they don't, but because they can sleep, even if just a little. You can't remember the last morning you stayed in bed past 6. Fringe detail: some working-class women formed informal baking clubs, rotating whose oven was used each day to conserve coal. It was early time-sharing, long before the term existed. You might be expected to cook 5 families' bread once a week. Guess who scrubbed the pans? And let's talk about the sewing machine. It's a marvel. It really is. You can stitch a hem in minutes that used to take hours. But now your family expects more clothes. Better clothes. Faster. You become a one-woman sweatshop, sewing until your fingers go numb, your foot pumping the treadle like it's a church organ that only plays one hymn. Get it done. The children? They help, sure. In theory. But mostly they get underfoot, spill things, cry about soup that's too hot or bread that's too dry. You love them, desperately. But love doesn't make them quieter. Or cleaner. Once, you tried to take a rest. Just a quick nap, mid-afternoon. You woke to the smell of burnt porridge and a baby eating chalk. Lesson learned. Your friend Aggie lives 3 doors down. She works in a hat shop and has no children. Her flat is spotless. Her hands are soft. She always has biscuits. You love her and hate her at the same time. She sometimes offers to help, but you always decline. Pride's a strange thing. There's no pension, no time off, no weekend. Just a blur of days, each one identical to the last, distinguished only by what you managed to clean. The reward? Maybe a muttered thank you. Maybe a clean towel. Maybe, on the rarest of occasions, a cup of tea that's still warm when you drink it. Odd tidbit. Queen Victoria, that symbol of prim domestic virtue, famously had more than 100 servants managing her household. Meanwhile, working-class women were expected to emulate her ideals with exactly 0 staff, a cold stove, and 1 good apron. You attend chapel on Sundays, not so much for salvation, but because the benches are the only clean surfaces you get to sit on that week. You listen to sermons about patience and virtue and the sanctity of motherhood. You stare at the stained glass windows and wonder if heaven has laundry. Sometimes, when the children are finally asleep, you sit in the front room with your mending and imagine a world where rest isn't a luxury, where your worth isn't measured by how white the sheets are or how fast you can peel potatoes. You don't ask for much, just a little peace, maybe a few hours where no one needs you. But the coal bucket is empty again, so you rise, quietly, and do what needs doing. They say women in the Industrial Revolution were either working or at home. You scoff at that. You've never worked harder than since you left the factory floor. You don't get wages, but the cost is real. The exhaustion, the isolation, the slow erasure of your own name. But somewhere, between the iron stove and the threadbare rug, you still exist. You hum a song you heard as a girl. You wear a ribbon no one else notices. You hide coins behind the sugar tin. Tiny rebellions. Small proofs of life. Tomorrow, you'll rise again. You'll feed the fire. You'll wash the clothes. You'll slice the bread, mend the cuffs, kiss the scrapes, sweep the soot, and never stop moving. And still, somehow, they'll say you don't have a job. You don't wake up in a proper bed this time. You wake in a cart, or a tent, or a hayloft with mice skittering in the rafters. Your pillow is a bundled shawl. Your floor smells of horses and damp wool. You're not staying. You're never staying. Because you're a tinker, a traveler, a washerwoman on the move. The kind of woman history forgets even faster than usual. The Industrial Revolution didn't reach you the same way. It thundered through towns and cities, but on the edges, across moors, along canals, through country lanes, it left a different kind of mark. Here, the work comes in bursts. A harvest, a kiln, a storm that knocks slates loose from rooftops. You take the jobs no one else wants, and you leave before anyone can write your name down. Mainstream fact. Itinerant women workers made up a significant, though often overlooked, portion of the Industrial Revolution's labor force, traveling from place to place doing seasonal, piecemeal, or illicit work such as straw plaiting, washing, hawking, and small-scale craft. You spend your days mending pots, patching clothes, foraging nettles, digging peat. You scrub laundry by rivers for other people, often the very same factory girls you used to be one of. Only now, They call you names behind your back. Gypsy. Drifter. Dirty. You're not dirty. You just don't stay in one place long enough to put up curtains. The pay's unreliable, but it's yours. You decide when to stop, when to leave, when to take a break by a hedge and eat a crust of bread in the company of birds. There's freedom in that, of a sort. Fringe detail. In some English counties, seasonal female workers would stitch their savings into the hems of their skirts as portable banks, hiding coins from both employers and thieves. It made the skirts heavy, but they jingled like tiny declarations of self-defense. You meet other women on the road. Maggie, who can sharpen a knife like no one else. Janie, who sells ribbons and ballads from a painted cart. Biddy, who once made wigs from horsehair and now moonlights as a healer. You all pretend not to know one another, just in case someone's watching. But you trade stories and bread and shelter on cold nights. There are jobs people won't talk about, but still pay for. You've carried messages, delivered herbs that aren't quite legal, told fortunes at village fairs, more for the coin than the conviction. Once, you helped dig out a flooded ditch with bare hands and got sixpence and a rash for your trouble. Historians still argue whether these women were part of the industrial system or operating outside it. As if picking strawberries in the morning and selling hot chestnuts by afternoon doesn't count as labor. As if not being on a payroll means you don't sweat. You remember sleeping near a canal lock one spring. The air was thick with midges. Your stomach rumbled like distant thunder. But the moonlight turned the water to silver, and for a moment, you felt something like peace. You wrapped yourself tighter in your cloak and let the moment hold you. You didn't own the land, but for that night, you belonged to it. You carry everything you own, sometimes on your back, sometimes in a cart, sometimes in a child's hands. Tools, thread, a cracked pan, one nice spoon, maybe a battered fiddle or a bag of dried herbs. You've become your own traveling workshop, your own factory, your own household. And when people see you on the road, they don't see labor. They see inconvenience, suspicion, a reminder that life isn't as stable as they'd like to believe. You walk past them anyway. Chin up, shawl tight, shoes worn to the soles. Odd tidbit. In some rural towns, women known as knocker-uppers were paid a few pennies to tap on windows with long sticks at dawn, essentially human alarm clocks for mill workers without timepieces. Many of them were itinerants, sleeping in sheds or barns between rounds. There's no Sunday best when you travel. Every dress is your best dress. Every cloak is your only cloak. You wash them in streams and dry them over fires. You patch and mend until the fabric forgets what color it once was. Children come with you, or they don't. Some women on the road carry babies tied to their backs, bouncing with every step. Others have none, by choice or by grief. But every woman you meet carries something. A burden, a story, a reason to keep walking. One winter, you spend 2 weeks mending baskets in a crumbling stable behind an inn. The work is cold, slow, splinter-prone. But it pays in stew and a corner by the hearth. You sleep surrounded by chickens and broken chairs. You've known worse. Sometimes, people ask you where you're from. You shrug. Here for now. They laugh, confused. They think you're being clever. You're not. It's just the truth. You don't have a ledger. You don't have an address. You don't leave records. But you leave marks, scratches on stone, soot on campfire logs, initials on tree trunks. They'll never teach your name in schools, but you've touched every part of the land they think they own. At night, the stars stretch above you, too big to belong to anyone. You tuck your feet beneath your skirt, sip cold tea, and whisper to yourself, "I'll move on tomorrow." And you will. But tonight, you're here. And that's enough. You wake to the sound of ocean wind flapping canvas and the low, rhythmic creak of wooden hulls shifting in harbor. You're not in Manchester anymore. Or Glasgow. You're not even in Britain. You're somewhere far warmer and far more dangerous. You've been shipped out. Or perhaps your work has been. Either way, the thread you once spun in a Lancashire mill now snakes across continents. Draped on looms in Bombay, wrapped in crates in Lagos, worn as uniforms by men in red coats. You followed the fabric trail and found yourself in the tangled heart of the empire. Mainstream fact, as Britain's empire expanded in the 19th century, the textile industry reached deep into colonized regions. Women in India, Africa, and the Caribbean became key players in the imperial economy, often producing raw materials or finished goods under harsh and exploitative conditions. You're in Calcutta now, or maybe in Madras. You don't know the language, but you know labor. You recognize the same hunched backs, the same calloused fingers, the same stoic silence. These women, draped in brightly dyed cotton, barefooted, hands stained with indigo, they work like you did. Only the scenery has changed. You watch a girl, barely 10, pounding flax into pulp with a stone pestle. Her mother lifts a bolt of cloth dyed the color of ripe mangoes and hangs it from a bamboo pole to dry. The sun bleaches everything here. Except the work. The work stays dark. Historians still argue whether imperial labor systems modernized colonized regions or simply mechanized old forms of exploitation. From where you stand, sweating in linen that's already clinging to your back, it feels like a newer coat on the same old cruelty. You see British overseers strolling with umbrellas and tea, issuing orders in clipped tones. You recognize them. You saw their cousins in the cotton mills back home. Same voice, same smirk, same belief that brown and female means expendable. Fringe detail. Some British textile firms in the 1800s exported unfinished cotton to India, where women were paid to hand-finish or embellish it, only for it to be shipped back to Britain and sold at higher prices. These back-and-forth cloth journeys were known as double freight. Profitable for merchants, brutal for laborers. You've never felt closer to someone who doesn't speak your language. You nod to the Indian woman beside you as you sort spools. She nods back. You offer a piece of bread. She shares dried tamarind. You don't need words. Your blisters speak just fine. And then there's Africa. You travel again, imagined or remembered, this time to the Gold Coast. Women sit beneath thatched awnings, weaving Kent cloth, pounding cassava, dyeing textiles in vats of dark, earthy color. Some are doing it for trade, some under colonial orders, some because it's the only thing standing between them and starvation. The British come offering industry, but really, they come for profit. They call it civilizing. You watch as a girl is taught to spin wool under a white overseer's watchful eye, her hands fast, her mouth shut. You know that silence. Mainstream fact. In many colonized African regions, women were redirected from subsistence-based textile and craft production to imperial export labor. These shifts disrupted entire communities and often led to severe food shortages and cultural loss. You hear singing. Not cheerful, not mournful. Steady, like a metronome. The rhythm keeps the hands moving. One woman sings while twisting raffia into rope. Another hums over her loom. The British call it native noise. You know better. It's labor keeping itself sane. There are rebellions, of course. Silent ones, mostly. A dye vat spilled accidentally. A day's shipment mysteriously vanished. A loom that won't work until an overseer walks away. You smile. You've done it too. Defiance doesn't always come with banners. Sometimes it's just a needle misplaced on purpose. You hear stories of the Caribbean women too. Cane cutters, washerwomen, field cooks, midwives. Some are free, technically. Others are indentured or imprisoned for vagrancy. One washes soldiers' clothes for pennies and burns herself with lime soap. Another braids sugarcane leaves into mats and sells them at the port, hoping for coins instead of slaps. Fringe detail. In Jamaica and Barbados, some washerwomen formed informal collectives, setting price floors and punishing undercutters, a grassroots version of unionization long before formal labor protections reached the colonies. You feel yourself pulled across threads, drawn from loom to loom, continent to continent, generation to generation. The empire doesn't run on maps or muskets. It runs on women, on their hands, their backs, their silence. And no one writes them down. Sometimes you hear British women back home say things like "those poor natives," while enjoying a muslin scarf stitched by an Indian girl with no name. You remember how it felt to hear your own work dismissed. You want to shake them? Or maybe just show them this. A woman kneeling in mud, turning raw cotton into gold while her baby sleeps in a sack beside her. You wonder if your thread ever passed through her hands. If the cotton you once twisted met her dye, and someone else's stitching, and someone else's label. And if that scarf, now resting on the lap of a London housewife, contains the echo of all of you. Odd tidbit. There's a British museum with a whole room dedicated to Empire textiles, None of the items are attributed to individual makers. Most are labeled simply maker unknown. The wind picks up. The cloth flutters like wings. You think about how many women have touched it, brushed it, bled on it, tied it around their waists to wipe sweat. All vanished into footnotes. But you're here, watching, listening, remembering. The empire might forget, but you won't. You sit in the corner of the workshop, tools spread around you like a soldier's kit. A spool of wire here, a bent wrench, a half-finished drawing of a gear you saw once in a dream. No, you're not a man. And no, you don't have a patent. But that thing on the table, the one that clicks and turns and almost hums, that's yours. They'll never say it was. Mainstream fact. During the Industrial Revolution, women frequently designed, improved, or contributed to machinery and household inventions, but were often excluded from patent rights and formal recognition due to gender-based legal and cultural barriers. You don't call yourself an inventor. You call yourself clever with things. You say it with a shrug. You've modified your spinning wheel so it doesn't chew thread anymore. You've stitched wire through your bodice hem to make it hold shape better in the rain. You've designed a collapsible drying rack for your neighbor who has no garden. You're not on any registry. You didn't attend the Polytechnic. But your mind works like clockwork, quiet, intricate, relentless. One of your friends, Nora, works in a dye house. She figured out a way to siphon steam from the pipe room to warm the drying chamber. She wasn't thanked, just told not to fiddle again. A month later, the foreman made her fix it for all 5 rooms. Historians still argue whether women's technical labor in the 19th century qualifies as innovation or mere domestic improvement. Which is hilarious, because if men had invented half the things you and your friends rig up just to get through the day, they'd have busts in the Science Museum. Take Mary Dixon Keese. Ever heard of her? Probably not. But in 1809, she became one of the first American women to receive a patent for weaving straw with silk. Her work was quietly adopted, widely used, and nearly erased. Fringe detail. In Britain, many women filed patents through male relatives, husbands, brothers, even adult sons, because legal systems refused to recognize women as independent economic agents. You've been working on something lately. A pulley system to lift laundry tubs without tipping them. You tested it with a basket of potatoes, then your baby, then finally the wash. It works. It's ugly, but it works. You consider writing it down. Then you remember you can't send it anywhere. Not under your own name. You keep tinkering. You use needles for wiring, thimbles for weights, scraps of thread for measurement. You dream in hinges and levers. You repurpose hairpins into tiny hooks, broom handles into cranks. The whole house becomes your laboratory. And then there's Bess. She's got a thing for chemicals. You're not entirely sure where she got her education. Some say an old apothecary took her on as a cleaner and she just watched. But now she mixes dyes, balms, rust treatments. Once, she made soap that glowed faintly in the dark. You're still not sure that was intentional. Odd tidbit. Some women developed their own homemade concoctions for industrial cleaning or cloth treatment, many of which were far more effective and far more dangerous than the commercial products of the time. Recipes were guarded like treasure maps. You sketch ideas in the margins of old almanacs. Your fingers are always ink-stained. Your hair always held up with a pencil. Your children think you're part magician. Your husband, if he's around, thinks you're dabbling. As if Edison wasn't just one big dabbler with better lighting. And yet, your inventions spread. Quietly. Like gossip. One day, you hear someone 2 streets over has built a clever drying arm that sounds suspiciously like yours. You don't mind. You're not in it for the glory. But still, a name would be nice. Just once. Sometimes, you hear about women who do get noticed. Lady Ada Lovelace, who writes about machines doing math. Her work's more theory than iron, but it's a sign. Florence Nightingale, who charts data into diagrams so pretty they make generals weep. Even she gets sidelined, called angelic instead of brilliant. You wonder how many names are missing from history. How many times anonymous really meant a woman who wasn't allowed to sign. Historians will later call this era a golden age of innovation. They'll list names, mostly male, mostly rich, mostly funded. But not yours. Not Meg's. Not the nameless genius who turned 2 teaspoons and a horseshoe into a functioning meat grinder. You keep working. Late at night, When the house is quiet and your hands still twitch from the day's labor, you pull out your notebook. You sketch another design. A better loom shuttle. A safer stovepipe. A cloth-cutting frame that won't slice your wrist open if you sneeze. You whisper the names of your inventions like bedtime stories. The shoulder saver. The mud-proof skirt. The infinite button hook. You laugh. Then you yawn. Then you promise yourself you'll draw it all again in the morning. And if someone asks, one day, how these things came to be, who thought of this hinge, that clasp, this filter, that stitch, you'll smile and say nothing. Because you know. And so does she. And her. And all the others. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You hear the bell before you feel it. A hollow clang from across the yard, sharper than the clatter of looms or the scuff of wooden shoes on stone. It's the school bell. Or something pretending to be one. You're not sure you believe in school anymore. Not in the way it's drawn in children's books, bright chalkboards, eager hands, clean pinafores. Your school is the factory. Mainstream fact. Many working-class girls during the Industrial Revolution received only fragmentary or irregular education, often attending half-time schools sponsored by mill owners, which prioritized obedience and industry over literacy or learning. You start your day before dawn. You carry your slate and your crust of bread in the same sack. You hope the ink hasn't leaked again. You step around puddles of dye water and past wagons stacked with raw cotton. By the time you reach the schoolroom, really just an upstairs shed with drafty walls, you're already sweating through your collar. The teacher is tired. You can tell. He smells faintly of pipe smoke and mildew. He doesn't like to repeat himself. You recite your letters, your numbers. You learn to write your name, sort of. But halfway through the lesson, the bell clangs again. Back to the floor. Back to the loom. You're a half-timer. You spend the rest of the day in the mill. No recess. No lunchtime songs. Just grease and thread and the ticking of clocks that always seem to run faster when you're tired and slower when you're hungry. Historians still argue whether factory schools were sincere efforts to educate or clever public relations, something to appease inspectors and keep Parliament quiet. Some say they gave children a chance at literacy. Others say they gave employers a loophole to keep child labor going under a different name. You just want a nap. There's a girl named Lucy who falls asleep during copy work. Her forehead lands with a soft thunk on her slate. The teacher doesn't scold her. He just sighs. You all sigh? You're all halfway asleep anyway. Fringe detail. In some towns, school inspectors reported that the children's hands were too calloused to hold chalk properly. One even noted that several girls arrived each morning with their fingertips bandaged, making writing nearly impossible. Sometimes you do learn. You memorize poetry without understanding it. You solve math problems that seem disconnected from the price of bread. You know your name, your father's name, and how many stitches are needed to close a factory tear. You also learn silence. You learn not to speak unless asked, not to yawn, not to slouch. You learn to stand straight even when your back aches, and to nod even when you have no idea what the question was. These are lessons too, just not the kind they put on report cards. Your parents don't ask about school. They ask if you're eating, if you're still earning, if your boots need patching. There's no talk of futures, just the present, how to survive it, how to stretch it, how to get through one more day without breaking. There are girls who never go to school at all. They lie about their age to get full-time work. They look older, somehow, with soot streaks on their cheeks and shoulders hunched from lifting crates. You envy them, and pity them, and understand them. One girl, Mavis, tells you she used to read books, real books, before her mother died, before she had to take in washing and help with her brothers. Now she just memorizes passages in her head, like little fires she can keep lit even without the page. You do that too. Lines of poetry, half-remembered stories, jokes, things that feel too small to matter but too precious to forget. Odd tidbit. In one northern factory school, the girls were taught to read using thread count charts and factory diagrams, tools meant to increase productivity more than imagination. The most popular reader was a pamphlet on cotton sorting, disguised as a learning aid. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between shifts, you pretend you're in a real classroom. A proper one, with a window that opens, with a teacher who smiles, with lessons that feel like keys, not locks. You imagine reading books about faraway lands, drawing maps in ink, solving riddles. debating ideas, learning not just to count wages, but to question why they're so low, learning to ask, "You never say this out loud." The other girls would laugh. Or worse, look at you like you've gone soft. Hope is dangerous. It makes you slow. It makes you careless. But still, you tuck scraps of paper into your apron. Bits of poems, riddles, sentences you invent and rewrite in your head while spinning thread. You don't know what to do with them yet, but they feel important. And when the bell rings again, calling you back to the looms, you go. Of course you go. But you go with something tucked inside your collar that wasn't there before. You're a half-child, half-worker, raised between two worlds. One of ink and one of oil. One of dusty books and dusty machines. You're not fully in either, but you know your way around both. And that's something. The coin hits your palm with a dull thud. It's smaller than you hoped. Always is. The foreman grunts your name without looking up. You step aside to count your week's wages, pressing the coins into your palm like they might multiply if you hold them tightly enough. They don't. Wages are a delicate joke. Not the funny kind. The kind you whisper so no one hears. You worked 6 days this week, 10 hours a day, and you've earned just enough to pay rent, buy bread, maybe replace that button you lost 3 Thursdays ago. That's it. No surprise coins. No spare for sugar. No cushion for disaster. Mainstream fact. In the 19th century, working women in industrial jobs earned, on average, less than half the wages of men performing similar tasks. Married women were often paid even less, on the assumption that their husbands provided for them. Your pay is already promised away. A few pence to the boarding house matron, a few to the coal man, a few set aside for soap and boot repairs. The rest? Gone. Your stomach clenches. You'd planned to buy cloth for a new shawl. Not now. But you're still lucky, in a way. You have wages. That gives you a kind of power. Not a loud one. A quiet kind. Like a candle no one sees until the room goes dark. You think of Margaret, who slipped on a grease patch last month and twisted her wrist. Couldn't work. No pay. No treatment. She pawned her boots and now wraps her feet in rags. She still shows up. That's how the system works. Don't show, don't eat. Fringe detail. Some women created scratch unions, pooling a few pence from each paycheck into a tin kept under a floorboard. It wasn't enough to quit working, but it could help someone pay rent or bury a child. The box was passed around like a secret heartbeat. And then there are the wounds. The ones the pay doesn't cover. You've got a burn across your forearm from when the loom jammed and flared up. It healed badly. Twisted. You hide it under your sleeve. The foreman called it bad luck. You called it Thursday. There's no compensation. No safety net. You might as well throw your complaint into the fire and watch it burn. Your body is part of the cost. Everyone knows it. No one says it. Historians still argue whether early industrial labor created economic independence for women or just new forms of dependency. The truth lives in the pay slip. Short, smudged, silently brutal. You see girls with bandaged fingers still running machines. You see women coughing up soot and still dragging bales of cotton. No one wants to fall behind. Falling behind means being replaced. You are never irreplaceable. You are never secure. And if you marry, things don't get better. Just different. Your wages might go down or vanish entirely. Some mills won't hire married women. Others will, at reduced pay. Because surely your husband provides now. He doesn't. Not really. Or maybe he drinks. Or maybe he's decent but poor. Either way, your coin purse feels lighter than it did when you were single. Dowries come into it too. You've seen the negotiations. A girl's future reduced to a teapot, a pair of boots, a week's wages in a sealed envelope. One father offered a pig. Another promised his daughter could sew 12 shirts in a week. Marriage as a transaction, and you're the item traded. Fringe fact. Some families paid girls to marry quickly, to reduce the number of mouths to feed. Others charged the suitor a fee to take a strong worker off their hands. The language wasn't always kind. You know women who married for love. But most of them still work. Still bleed. Still stretch coin across hunger. The ring doesn't change that. It just gives you a new last name to be called by while your hands blister. You also know women who didn't marry. Whether by choice or by fate, they kept their wages for themselves. Some rented small flats. Some lived with sisters. Some became midwives, seamstresses, teachers, anything to escape the machines. It didn't make them rich, but it made them free. Sometimes you fantasize about leaving, about saving every coin in secret, about boarding a train to somewhere they don't ask what your hands used to do, somewhere with books and clean sheets, somewhere you can sleep in. But then you remember the scratches on your knuckles, the burn on your forearm, the girl next to you who limps now and still hasn't saved enough for new boots. You're all running just to stay in place. You hand over part of your wages to your mother. She doesn't ask anymore. She just nods. She knows what the money cost. She knows the weight of every blister. She kissed the same loom dust when she was your age. Maybe younger. Odd tidbit. Some women sewed tiny pockets inside their corsets to hide coins from landlords or husbands. Corset banks, they called them. The money chafed, but it stayed safe. Your hands are stained. Your pay slip crumpled. You count your coins again, just in case you missed one. You didn't, but you count them anyway. Hope is a strange habit. You tuck the money into your apron, button the flap, and walk out into the gray street. The wind cuts like it always does. But for one quiet moment, you imagine what it would feel like to be paid what you're worth. It's almost laughable. Almost. The fog rolls in thick tonight. You pull your shawl tighter, though the fabric's too thin to make much difference. The gas lamps glow like floating ghosts down the lane, and every footstep sounds louder in the hush. The factory's closed now. The fire's banked. The machine's sleeping. The town exhales slowly, like it's trying to forget itself. You walk the same streets you always do, past the mill, past the canal, past the bakery with its windows already shuttered. But tonight, you see the town differently. You see the layers, the ghost prints, the women who used to walk here, the girls who vanished, the babies who cried under looms, the jokes shared at washing lines, the humming by the boiler, the revolts, the repairs, the ribbons tucked into work aprons. This was their world, their empire, built not with gold or steel, but with cloth and breath and sheer persistence. And now? Now it's all slipping from memory. Mainstream fact. As the Industrial Revolution gave way to mechanization and later global shifts, the vital role of working women, particularly in British factories, was gradually omitted from public narratives. Their contributions faded beneath the achievements of industrialists and inventors. You pass the tenements. Some are being pulled down now, replaced by wider streets and cleaner buildings. Progress, they say. You wonder if they remember who lived there, who scrubbed those floors, who stitched the curtains, who raised the future workers, washed the blood from shirts, stirred the porridge, spun the thread. Probably not. You reach the canal bridge and stop. It's quiet here. The water sluggish, choked with weeds. You stare at your reflection and see not just yourself, but all the others too, woven into you. The spinners and match girls, the traveling tinkers, the quiet mothers at coal stoves, the girl with string around her wrist, the woman with phosphorus on her breath, the sisters who sang protest songs under their breath and dared to sign their names with trembling hands. Fringe detail. In 1906, a historian writing on industrial progress in the North dedicated 5 pages to the cotton gin and only one passing sentence to the laborers. It read, "The workforce was vast, mostly women and children, whose lives were hard." Then it moved on. That sentence has echoed for over a century. Whose lives were hard. As if that's all that mattered. As if that sums it up. As if pain were the only story. But it wasn't. There was mischief too. There was laughter behind storage crates. Whispered crushes. Secret handshakes. Homemade jewelry made from wire scraps and broken buttons. There was brilliance. The pulley riggers and herbal chemists. The pattern cutters and whistleblowers. There was resistance. The marchers, the petition signers, the girls who simply refused to be quiet. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution empowered women or deepened their exploitation. You walk past the soot-stained bricks and think, both. Neither. More than that. You think about the girl who carried her baby to work in a shawl, the woman who built a drying rack from broomsticks, the girl who dropped out of school and still wrote poetry in the margins of her work log. You think about every woman who didn't survive long enough to be remembered. There were so many. The fog thickens. Your footsteps slow. You don't feel tired. Not in your bones. Not like usual. Just heavy. Like you're made of dust and thread and stories. All the stories no one wrote down. You stop by a wall, lean on the cold brick. There's a bit of chalk on the edge, half a name. You don't know who left it. But it's enough. Someone was here. Someone said, I existed. You whisper your own name, just to hear it in the air. It feels small, but not weak. Odd tidbit. Some women in textile towns carve their initials into the backs of wooden work stools. Generations later, those stools were sold at auction as antique factory furniture, with no idea of the hands that shaped them. You breathe in. The air tastes of coal and ash and memory. You wonder how long it will take before no one remembers at all. How long before the mills become museums? Before the cloth becomes costume? Before the women become fiction? But not tonight. Tonight, you walk slowly through the fog. Not toward home, not toward work, just forward. With every step, you carry them with you. Their labor, their laughter, their lives. And when the gas lamps flicker behind you and the city curls into sleep, you keep walking, like the thread never really broke. Underscore. The streets are silent now. The machines have long stopped humming. The lamps are dim. The fog has rolled in thick enough to soften the outlines of everything. Chimneys, rooftops, memories. You can almost believe the world is holding its breath, wrapped in a blanket of stillness. You slow your steps. Let your shoulders drop. The night isn't asking anything of you anymore. No spinning. No sweeping. No counting coins. Just air. Just silence. Just rest. Beneath the weight of all those lives, you feel something unexpected. Not sorrow, not exhaustion, but a kind of steady peace. Because they were here. And now you are too. You've walked their footsteps, seen through their eyes, felt their hands on your back, gently guiding you through smoke and thread and time. And now you're drifting. You picture a room, quiet, warm, tucked away behind a brick wall thick with ivy. Inside, a kettle hums softly. A single candle flickers. And on the shelf, a row of unlabeled books. Their pages filled not with famous names, but the quiet records of everyday lives. You reach for one. It opens to a page that smells faintly of starch and soot. And on it, written in firm, careful script, is yours. You close your eyes. The page turns. The fog deepens. The night wraps around you like a shawl well worn and well loved. And sleep, at last, arrives, slow, certain, and full of dreams woven from cotton, coal, and memory. Sweet dreams,